brand being everywhere will ultimately come full circle, and now they're a part of your marketing ecosystem. So whether you touch them through an ad, whether you touch them through an SMS, whether you touch them through a television commercial, you touch them 3 times. You're like, hey, I can't track my television commercial. Well, okay, how much money did you spend? If you can't track it, spend less. Just make sure you still do it. And that's really where omnichannel comes into play. As marketing evolves, you have to be everywhere. The consumer is getting smarter and smarter. If I realize that I'm seeing all these Facebook ads, I may start to use another platform more. Well, guess what? I'm marketing on that platform as well. Micro-segmentation. This one's very important, but very difficult to do. I will touch on this in a moment as far as what you need to look at when it comes to microsegmentation, but what microsegmentation means is putting all of your audiences into very narrow niche groups and then marketing appropriately for that group. Whether that's creative, whether that's copy, whether that's the platform. Just because I said omni-channel, be on all of them, didn't mean that I say, hey, market to every single person on all of them. Maybe you have a wide variety of services and you're like, hey, I want to get in front of moms. Well, I'm going to be on Pinterest. Well, moms, I also want to get in front of their husbands. Maybe they're using Facebook and Instagram. So you need to market everywhere, but appropriately for who you're trying to get in front of. So don't get those two confused. A lot of people may understand that I meant everywhere, but I didn't mean everywhere just to spend the money. I meant everywhere to get in front of the right person. And then you have to be contextual to the platform. You have to understand, hey, if I'm going after pet owners, what do pet owners enjoy? They're probably very fond of their animal and think of them as their family. They're probably, take care of them and spend a good bit of money on them. So those are the types of things that you would want in your creative, in your copy, in your messaging. How do you get their attention? That's where that micro-segmentation comes into play. Content interaction. How do you engage with the content? Well, as you all know, if I showed you a graphic versus that CTAR video, which one would you all have enjoyed more? The graphic? No, probably not. Because the way we interact with content has become more important than ever. We want to make sure it's interactive, make sure we can engage with it, and make sure it actually makes us feel like taking action. And that's what content interaction is. And the last is building a community. This one really is an emphasis of that Sour Patch Kid effect, because building a community takes time. And guess what? It means that you have to give so much value before you really receive anything. And there's an easy way that I look at this. It's even in a philosophy of my life that I like to use, which is the 51-49% rule. And what that means is in any engagement or interaction or even any individual that I meet, what I'm looking to do is give you 51% of the value and I only want 49%. Why? Because you won. And I'm okay with that. And if you as business owners, as marketers understand that when you give more than you receive, you will win. And that's where you build that community. And it's the hardest thing to do on social, but if you really make an emphasis of it, it will actually pay off in the long run. But let's talk a little bit about all of these 4 channels a little bit more. So like I mentioned, what is omni-channel, right? So it's all the social platforms, it's mobile versus desktop. When I'm looking at an app versus when I'm looking at a website on my computer, 2 very different mindsets, right? All content placements. When I'm looking at a story versus when I'm looking at a graphic versus when I'm looking at a video on YouTube, right? You engage with all of it very differently. Well, so does your audience as well. Untraditional networks, Discord, Reddit, or Tumblr, like I mentioned, not only are the relevant social platforms where you need to be anywhere that's relevant. And this goes back to when I was mentioning the metaverse. When it becomes relevant, don't be afraid to hop in. When you can advertise where the industry of marketing is going, be one of the early adopters. Be one of the first ones there. Trial and error. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket, but split your budget, test it out, see what works. You can always make the decision that, hey, I never received any lucrative benefits out of this platform. Let's scale back, right? So you gotta learn. And then traditional digital Web 3.0, offline channels like direct mailers and SMS, and then even events such as this one, right? You want to make sure that when you come to events like this, I would have not met any one of you if I ran as many ads as possible, but the fact that I'm here, all of you got to see what I am presenting to them, right? Micro-segmentation. So going back into this one, everybody knows or may not know, but the four critical categories of segmentation in general are geography, demographic, psychographic, and behavioral. Now, microsegmentation combines all of these into one, and like I said, into the narrow niches that you're looking for. How is it that I can get in front of people in the US that are 25 to 40 that are fond of pets and have visited my website at least 3 times? Well, guess what? I just tied all 3 of those into one and I created my own audience. Same thing that you have to do. Become the end user and understand, like, hey, if this is what I was doing, what would I expect on my end? When you tie all 4 of these together, that means you have to personalize the experience, that means you have to personalize the message, that means you have to personalize what the person sees after they take an action, right? So you want to tie all of these in together, and that's what gives you micro-segmentation. Because of micro-segmentation, you'll deliver more personalized and a better digital experience. You'll be able to monitor, and look at what's happening within your audience. Are people's mindsets changing? Are people that are now 25 to 35 spending more money than people that are 35 and older? You have to understand what's happening in your landscape as well, because guess what? It changes. And then lastly, you can strategize and make decisions based off of these segments. If you never test these out and you just leave it wide open and you're like, hey, it's going well guess what? That's fine, but you didn't get to the core root of why it was going well, or because of who is it going well. And that's always important to understand. Okay, next one is going to be, content interaction. So like I was mentioning earlier, what does that truly mean? With the way that digital content works now, it's constantly changing all the time, right? Like I mentioned earlier, new placements like Instagram Reels, you want to make sure that's one way to engage, but not just that. Video content, interactive content, experiences. Maybe some of you know about experience ads on Facebook, and maybe you don't, but what experience ads are is it's not just your traditional ad when you're scrolling through your feed that you see. Instead, you click on it, and then you go through an immersive experience. You can slide right, you can scroll up, you can get all kinds of information. There may be a game that you can play, and then ultimately you end on the call to action. Well, that was a lot more fun and intuitive than you just seeing a graphics and you scrolling past your feed. It goes back to that thumb-stopping content that Nisha was talking about. How is it that you make people stop and truly engage with what you put out there? And it comes to the way that they interact with the content, which is more important than ever. Right? User-generated content, how people interact with content that we put out versus what their friends and family or an influencer put out is completely different. That's why you have to integrate each and every one of these things into your strategy. And then, like I said, pick and choose what works, right? I'm not saying forever spend all your money on all these different things. I'm a marketer, I understand it gets expensive. But what you need to do is you try, you test, you figure out what happens, and then it goes back to that CTAR process. You learn, and you start all over. And then lastly, the community. So like I mentioned, what are a few places where communities are actually becoming the most important? And here are a few that I've listed. Now, why is community more important? Because when you are a community, you have the largest impact on your audience. Nobody is going to be able to convince your audience to buy your product or service better than themselves. And when you build that community, guess what will happen? You won't have to market as much. They will become your own loyal customers, and guess what? They market for you. Our best customers are ones that we get from referrals from other customers. Why? They're already bought in. I don't have to sell you. I don't have to pitch to you why it's working. I don't have to help show you what kind of return you're getting, because you know based off of your experience with a friend or a colleague or a coworker that this works and it's going to head it in the right direction. So when you build an actual community, you're able to actually turn them into brand advocates, and then they will do it for you. And now you don't have to worry about earlier, Coach Schultz told me all I need to do is spend money. Well, become a community and you won't have to spend as much money. When you think about Nikes, I'm sure some of you have them on. You didn't buy them because Nike ran an ad in your face. You bought them because you were like, it's Nike. Same thing with Starbucks, right? I'm sure some of you drink coffee. You didn't buy Starbucks because you're like, hey, I got coffee. The expo had coffee. You got Starbucks because you like Starbucks. Same thing with your brand. Okay? Questions, comments? Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Great question. The question was, is there a formula that we utilize for when we're testing and also when it comes to the amount of budget we're spending? So long story short, no secret formula, right? The way that I typically think about it is first when it comes to new testing and the audiences, the budget is really dependent on the size of who you're going after, which is why I mentioned the micro-segmentation. The more segmented and smaller the audience, the less budget you need to use. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars to gain readers. You can spend a little bit, understand what's happening, and then make calculated decisions from there. Sure, you want a rule of thumb, I would say for every 1 million people in your audience, spend $25 a day. You got 5 million people in your audience, spend $125 a day. But that doesn't always work, and because everyone's industry and brands are so different, that's why it varies, and that's why I never have one simple formula, because what worked for you may not work for him, vice versa, what worked for him may not work for her. So it's really trial and error, and that's why it goes to that strategy step when I talk about CCAR, which is the S. That's where you spend most of your time. In that entire process, I would spend 55% of my time on the strategy. The rest of it is just trial and error and then learning from it. Like I said, none of us are Nostradamus. We can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen. So guess what? We can't be smart, educated human beings and make decisions based on what actually happens. Great question. How long is the learning phase? The learning phase is minimum, I would say 72 hours. At that point, you can start to make calculated decisions. Now, I'll throw a caveat to that. It's 72 hours unless you're spending more than $500 a day. When you spend that amount of money that quickly, you start to understand much quicker and you can pivot quicker. But if you're spending less than $500 a day, give it 72 hours. Sometimes it takes the ads time to learn and grow. I've seen in situations where a client of ours was looking for mobile app downloads for less than $5. Well, the first 3 days, those downloads were coming in at about $9, $8, $10. Well, as the algorithm learned itself, because these platforms are smart, in 4 or 5 days, it slowly started to get down, eventually to about a week later, where we were at the ideal optimal goal. So minimum 72 hours, but if you're spending a good bit of money, you can learn as quickly as the next day. No. Yeah, those are people that move very slow, like snails, so don't listen to them. No. If you are waiting a whole month to make marketing changes, the landscape of marketing itself has changed in that amount of time, and I'd be surprised that you haven't already figured out what's working, what's not working. In that same amount of time, the second part of your question, which was the A/B test, in that month, I would have figured out what copy works the best, what type of headline, what type of creative, what type of audience. I would have done all 4 of those tests once a week, and by the end of the month, I already got an idea of what I need to do next. So I wouldn't wait a month to figure out how to optimize what's working, what's not working. Any other questions? Yes.
So does socially, you're like you're taking over all of social media for a company. So does that you're creating customized content for that company, or did you just help them create content for them for their marketing?
No. So we are a full service one-stop shop when it comes to social. So whenever we get into an engagement with the company, not only are we looking at, hey, does the company itself need creative or content, but we're looking at the goals, right? So we had a company recently come to us where they're in the real estate space and they develop these large real estate properties, but they weren't going after different companies or individuals for their real estate properties. What they were going after was recruiting qualified talent for themselves. So instead of running content for brand awareness or education or value, instead we're promoting the culture, right? We want people to understand what type of business we are, what are our core values, why would you want to work here, how can it help you in your career development. So we create content depending on the goal or what it is that the brand is looking to achieve. But yeah, we'll conceptualize, we'll ideate, we'll do the production, and then we deliver from start to finish.
Oh, thank you. Sterling silver, always. It's good grounding. 925, yeah, I use a big grounding.
Yes.
I haven't got those yet, like that type.
Yeah, 925 or volume is where to go. Like, and it's a good grounding, so like it grounds me.
Sure.
Use my energy.
So it depends, like I mentioned, the omni-channel, right? So first you have to understand who is it you're trying to get in front of, right? You got an e-commerce store, you have a specific product, there's a specific use case. Who do I need to get in front of? Which medium or platform is the best? The second thing you need to do is how do you need to speak to them? Because all of these platforms have robust targeting capabilities, some better than others. I'll give you a good example. On Facebook, I can target by demographic, by interest, by very granular actions and behaviors. Or on Twitter, I can't do that. But on Twitter, what I can do is target by keywords and other pages you follow or other accounts you follow. Well, based on what I know about the targeting, now I can understand what message does the user need to receive. If I'm able to just target off keywords on Twitter, well, what information is the most valuable? If people are typing in the name of your product, well, what they probably care about is the benefits of it, the price, how useful is it, the reviews. Whereas on Facebook, because I'm able to get in front of the exact purchaser, maybe you don't need all that. Maybe you tell them, hey, I got a 50% off, buy it right now. And that's what's more important to them because they already know what your product does. Whereas in some situations, you have to educate on your product. So you have to tailor, like I said, the micro-segmentation is very important. Because not only are there different segmentations of individuals, there's different segmentations of just you in what stage of the journey you are. Are you someone that's in the awareness stage, considering, decision-making? Because what you see when you're decision-making isn't what you should see when you're in the awareness stage. So that's important as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. We'll have the same talks tomorrow, so for those of you that may have missed one of the other ones, we'll be here starting tomorrow at 11 o'clock, okay? Thank you all.